Well, we begin our study in Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. The Jews really thought a lot of their temple. That was extremely sacred to them, and they didn't believe anything could happen to that God would protect it. And so Jesus was trying to open their eyes to what's going to happen when the Jewish nation rejects him as their Savior. And of course he knew that they would, and they had been all along. There were some who accepted him, but in general they rejected. And so he pointed out to his disciples that the temple would be so demolished that not even one stone would be upon another. But they didn't get the point. In verse 3, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So they totally missed the point. They thought he was talking about the second coming of Jesus. That was the only event that they could fathom would knock the temple down and wouldn't be one stone upon another. However, that wasn't really what Jesus was talking about. So he decided in his explanation to them to give them signs of both events, because similar things would happen. One was when a nation rejected God. And the final one is when the world rejects God. There'll always be some faithful ones, but those that are not faithful are in the vast majority. And so we can, when we study this chapter, we can think of both events. One is historic, we can see that it happened back then. The other one is still future. And we're going to look at just one part of what he said would happen in Matthew 24, verses 7 and 8. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So what we're seeing with COVID-19 is the beginning of sorrows. And a lot of other things are going to happen. Now, I think we're experiencing both of these when we think about the worldwide situation, because the way many countries are handling this pestilence, people are starving. And I'm on LinkedIn, and I've connected with a lot of pastors around the world and different people, but mostly pastors. And I've had at least 7 or 8 of them plead for money because they're running an orphanage or in India or Africa, and they don't have food. And the countries aren't even letting them go get food in many cases. And so they're really in desperate situations. These two things tend to go together, and we have also seen earthquakes on the increase. And so Jesus' words, of course, are being fulfilled. Now, Luke also put this in his gospel in Luke 21:11. It says, "And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven." So the worst thing we could do is just ignore the sign. And I don't think too many people are thinking about this as a sign of Jesus coming. They're just trying to avoid catching it. We're glad they're trying to do that. And that they're, hoping that this will pass by as soon as possible. But this is a warning to the world, and those warnings will continue. In fact, they'll be so bad that in verse 26 of Luke 21, it says that men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. Now, this isn't the first one that has plagued the world, but what makes it so scary when a new one comes along, they don't know how to treat it. They don't know how to help people. And so when you start thinking of what they originally said as to how many people would die, it creates a panic. And I don't know whether that was done on purpose or whether it was just fear that led to the numbers that they were quoting. But regardless, men's hearts were failing them for fear. And some people are still panicked even now, after all this time has gone by. But this is just the beginning. This is just a start. We've had some things, yes, in the past, but this is a step up from what we've had for an awful long time. Now, why are we going to have so many problems? In Matthew 24, again, verses 37 to 39, it says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." So the condition of the world in the time that Noah lived is similar to the condition of the world in our day. And it names some of the problems. "For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking." Now there's nothing wrong to eat and drink. But it's what they're drinking, what they're eating, how much they're eating. And, gluttony is a sin of this age, just like it was back then. And people didn't care whether it was healthy or not. They just wanted it. And so that is one sign. Marrying and giving in marriage. Again, there's nothing wrong in getting married. But the obsession with marriage existed back then just like it does now. And people don't, worry about whether they can stay together or not. They just want to get married, and if it doesn't work, they just divorce and get somebody else. And this is what was going on in Noah's time. It went on until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away. So they did not heed the warning. They just kept right on going in that behavior until the flood came, and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. That's why we know that Matthew 24 is talking also about the second coming, even though it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened in 70 AD. In Genesis 6:3, it gives a key that's very important for us. "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." So the instruction came to Noah that he was to build an ark. And from the time that he started building the ark until the flood came was 120 years. And so what it's saying is that there's coming a close of probation. There's a time when you can't change sides anymore. So you need to listen to Noah while he's preaching. But they didn't. Some listened for a while, but in general they didn't listen. And that's unfortunately what will largely happen the same way just before Jesus comes. That the message will go out, but most people will not listen until finally another close of probation comes when it's too late to make a decision. Now, unfortunately, God gets the blame for a lot of these disasters. And so we need to take a look at who's responsible for these things. In 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." The devil loves to destroy people. He loves to give them pain and suffering. That's his business. And so we're warned that, especially in the last days, we need to be watching out for Satan. He's going about as a roaring lion. It's not just to destroy us physically, but spiritually as well. And 2 Corinthians 11:14 shows how sneaky he is. It says, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." Satan has developed over 6,000 years. He's developed the ability to hide what he's doing. And it looks like he's an angel of light, and he makes it look like God's the bad one, and he's the angel of light. But the Bible has told us so that we understand that's not true. Satan is simply hiding what he's doing. In Ephesians 2:2, it says, "Wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air." Now he's speaking to the Ephesians about the fact that they used to do the things that Satan would like them to do. But notice the label that he puts on Satan. He's the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. So when a tornado goes through, even insurance companies call it an act of God. It's not an act of God, it's an act of the devil. And so he's the prince of the power of the air. He can do hurricanes, he can do tornadoes. And it's also interesting, he can damage the air and make people sick because he's the prince of the power of the air. Now, we do have protection, if we will, from at least the most dangerous, which is spiritual destruction. You know, if we really have a relationship with Jesus and we die, it's not a huge problem because we have an eternity afterward. But if we lose out spiritually and we don't do what Paul said to the Ephesians here, then we're really in trouble. "Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil." And it's not just, the spiritual warfare that he's trying to do against us, But he wants us to fear the same fear that the world is fearing as well, because fear damages our health and makes us more susceptible to disease and other things. So let's take a look at this character called the devil. In Ezekiel 28, verses 12 and 13, we read this: Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God. Now don't be fooled that it talks about the king of Tyrus. As we go on, there is no king on earth that was in the Garden of Eden. And so obviously, even though it says the king of Tyrus, it's talking about Satan, originally known as Lucifer. Thou sealest up the sun, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Some people think that God made a mistake in making Lucifer. No, there was absolutely nothing wrong with him. He was sealed up with full of wisdom. If you look at him, he was extremely handsome, perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. So that Garden of Eden, we know he was there when he tempted Adam and Eve. And so he had been in the Garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering: the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold, the workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. So two other interesting facts. In heaven, in Revelation, we find out that even the streets are of gold. So having all these beautiful stones and some which we usually call jewelry today, it doesn't mean the same thing in heaven that it means here. It's just everyday living. So he was there. You know, around God's throne, he has all these beautiful stones and everything. And also, he was prepared to be the choir leader. He was given special musical gifts. And as I've noticed through the years, when people are really good musicians, they usually don't stay humble. There's something about music and the praise that people give to those that are really good in music that has the tendency to cause them to become proud. And of course, that's what happened to Satan. Lucifer, that is, he became proud, as we'll read. Going on in verses 14 to 16, Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. Now we see God's throne, and on both sides of his throne was a covering angel. And Lucifer was one of those covering angels. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. In other words, that's where God's throne is. It's called a mountain of God, and he was right there beside God. Thou hast walked up and down the midst of the stones of fire. So all those jewels that we read about must line the walkway to God's throne. And so he had walked back and forth up that sidewalk. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. So the Bible testifies there was no flaw in Lucifer. But since God gives to all of his creatures, including us, the power of choice, Lucifer made some bad choices. So thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. By the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence. In other words, he entertained thoughts that led him in the wrong direction. And as those thoughts went developed in him, they filled him with thoughts of violence. And thou hast sinned. Therefore, I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God. So Ezekiel was shown that he had to be thrown out from being around God's throne. He would have stayed there if he'd been allowed to stay there. And I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. And then it finishes with telling us what's going to happen to Lucifer now. We call him Satan or the devil. What's going to happen to him in the future? Ezekiel 28:17 through 19. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. So he was made so perfect and so wonderful, and he had such gifts of music that he started getting proud. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. Now, those who really understand about Satan can sometimes be afraid of him. We don't have to be afraid of him. In every encounter between Christ and Satan, Christ is one. And if we're followers of Christ, then we don't need to be afraid of what Satan can do. But there's lots of people that would be afraid, especially if they saw him. And God says, well, I'm going to throw him down, and people are going to say, wow, he doesn't have much power at all. Therefore, let's see, back up here. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the, I will lay thee before kings, and that they may behold thee. Why? Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. Some try to indicate that Satan is going to take care of the people in hell, and he's going to make sure that they burn on all sides. Sometimes he's pictured with a pitchfork and so on. No, he's going to be in the fire. That fire is going to reduce him to ashes. I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. All they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee. Why will they be astonished? Because he has no power. He can't do anything. He cannot stop what God is doing to him. Thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more. So that, we could call that good news about the devil. He's not going to be able to cause these kind of problems that we are talking about tonight for very much longer. And he knows his time is short, so he's getting very active and trying to bring as much suffering and pain as he can. And yet make it look like it's God that's not taking care of people. There's another text that gives his other name, Isaiah 14:12-14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? how art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? So it starts out in this text with telling the outcome, what's going to happen to Satan in the future. Just like Ezekiel, it points out he's going to be shown to be weak and unable to do anything. But how did he get there? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Welcome. So really, what Lucifer is saying here, I can do better than God. I am going to demonstrate a better program. And for 6,000 years, he's been unable to make a better program. And so we know what the result is going to be. But he was so lifted up in pride that he thought he could beat God and that he could have a better program than what God had. But again, in verses 15 to 17, it says, Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell. So he doesn't take care of hell, he's going in hell. To the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? So in that moment, he's so weak, they're thinking, wow, how could he cause so much trouble? That made the world as a wilderness. Now here is a prediction. When the pestilences and the other things finish, that the devil's going to do. And of course, in the Bible, it does talk about the 7 last plagues. Now, those aren't sent by the devil. They come from God. There are some things that come from God. But Satan is going to do so many bad things. He's going to turn the world as a wilderness and destroy the cities thereof, that open not the house of his prisoners. So he's going to do an awful lot of things, and he's going to try to blame God for every one of them. That angel of light, he's going to take that image as much as possible until the very end. But if we understand our Bibles, we recognize, no, it's Satan that's doing all this trouble. And of course, now we have all these riots. We're getting a little taste in the destruction of what these riots are doing, of what will happen in order to destroy entire cities upon the earth. We also have the words of Jesus about what's going to happen to Satan in Matthew 25:41. Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire. He's talking about those that refused to accept Jesus before the close of probation. And he says, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire. But notice, it's not really prepared for them. Prepared for the devil and his angels. God never intended a single human being to have to burn up in that fire. That fire was made for the devil and his angels. But when people choose to follow the devil, they will end up in the same fire that the devil goes into, along with his angels. We also see a little bit about when he was thrown out of heaven in Revelation 12:7-9. And there was war in heaven. Michael. Now, Michael is the name for Jesus when he's doing battle, especially. And so There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. So he lost the battle. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. Now, praise God, it's not 100%, but it's so much of the world that it just pictures him deceiving the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, it's obvious that he got angels from God. And in a previous verse, in that chapter, verse 4, it tells us how many angels he got. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. So the devil was able to fool 1/3. We don't know how many angels there are, but he was able to deceive 1/3 of the angels. And so God has 2/3, and Satan was able to take 1/3. And they fought the battle, and Satan lost, and he and 1/3 of the angels were cast out of the world. Now, why do I share what the Bible says about the devil? Because it's very important for us to realize that God deserves no blame for this pandemic. And none of the other events that take place, except for the kind of things like, the 7 last plagues, then God does do that. But everyone's decision has been made by that time. Nobody changes sides at that time. And I thought maybe I'd share a few things from the internet about these pandemics. This one is in the World Economic Forum. If you want to look it up on the internet, I only took a few paragraphs from the articles. And it's published by the World Health Organization. In the 6th century, between 30 and 50 million people, roughly half the world's population at the time, died in the plague of Justinian, which is thought to have been spread by merchant ships infested with rodents. Now, we think it's bad what we're experiencing now, but can you imagine losing half of the world's population? About 800 years later, plague wreaked havoc on Europe, killing about 50 million people, or 60% of the continent's population. So this wasn't worldwide, but in Europe, it was an incredible population reduction that took place, 60%. The disease was known as the Black Death because it can cause blackening of body tissue, commonly in victims' fingers, toes, and nose. So I'm sure you've heard about the Black Death. Over the next 500 years, smaller plague epidemics continued to occur, including a major outbreak in England in 1665, in which 1/5 of London's population died. 20% of the people of England died in that one. The third plague pandemic originated in southwestern China's Yunnan province. I thought that was interesting. Came from the same place. And as I thought about it, it just might be because of the kind of things that they eat in China. The third plague pandemic originated in southwestern China's Yunnan province in the 1850s and moved along opium trade routes. By 1894, it had reached Guangzhou and Hong Kong. And from these port cities, it spread globally, resulting in more than 10 million deaths. Experts have warned the risk of major pandemics that could kill tens of millions of people and cause economic and social chaos is, notice this, those were bad, but is increasing. And governments aren't properly prepared. So even secular sources understand that we're looking at things that are going to make COVID-19 look like nothing. According to a new report by the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, epidemic-prone diseases such as influenza, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which we call SARS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, which was MERS, Ebola, Zika, plague, yellow fever, and others are harbingers of the new era of high impact, potentially fast spreading outbreaks that are more frequently detected and increasingly difficult to manage. Now, I'm not trying to scare everybody to death tonight of what's ahead, but we do need to know what's ahead. And we need to, first of all, make sure that we are spiritually connected with Jesus, because then whatever happens to us, it doesn't matter too much. But if we're not connected to Him, then we've got a lot to be afraid of. And also, Jesus has the power to protect us from all these things. And so, we do need to be aware. I picked this out long ago in one of my classes on signs of Jesus coming. It's kind of old at this point, but it was very similar to what I saw on the internet, which is so current. So I thought it was interesting, and it gives some of the reasons why we're headed toward a lot more sickness and plagues and pestilences. It was, the article of the title was Plagues, Guerrilla Warfare. In one wave after another, HIV, Ebola, Marburg virus, Lassa fever, Legionnaire's disease, hantavirus, hepatitis C, in all, at least 30 newly identified pathogens over the past 2 decades swooped down upon different population groups. At the same time, the human defensive perimeters were crumbling. So here's some of the things that could have helped but weren't able. Underfunded prevention programs. Prevention's always the best. And we're going to be teaching in this center how to avoid these kind of things. Along with excessive antibiotic use that led to drug resistance. They constantly have to change the power of the drug because they give too many drugs to people and the body builds up a resistance, so you have to get something stronger yet. We're allowing diseases like TB, dengue fever. I even had dengue fever, and it's nothing to want to have. I tell you, I was glad for hydrotherapy. Brought me through dengue fever. Bacterial meningitis, yellow fever, cholera, malaria, and even the dreaded plague to return. You know, for many years we've felt free of malaria here in this part of the world, but a number of years ago I heard a news note that they were no longer going to spray the lakes where the mosquitoes hatch out. I guess it was a financial issue maybe, and I'm not sure what all the reasons were. So that means in time malaria is coming back. Doesn't seem to have been, at least I haven't been aware that there's a problem with it, but you can see there's plenty. If you're going to fear the fear of the world, there's plenty to get scared about. Then I also found this article by the same group, the World Health Organization, and they're worried about disease X. And they say we should be too. They say the next pandemic is coming. I don't know whether that was written before COVID-19 or there's fear of another one. Known incurable diseases lurk in hidden reservoirs all over the world. Thousands of unknown viruses circulate around the globe. Guess what? The best protection against all those viruses is healthy living. But they're everywhere, all around us, all over the world, and in labs, both for the sake of experimentation and potentially also for nefarious purposes. Research is conducted on biological agents to see if it's possible to make them more deadly. And, you know, we can try to blame people for this, but it's the devil that puts that idea in their head. So he's the real one that we need to blame. In their recent blueprint for research on priority diseases that could cause the pandemic, the World Health Organization, WHO, added a new potential threat, disease X. The rest of the diseases on that list are already known conditions. These include hemorrhagic fevers, like Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, Ebola, Marburg, Lassa, Rift Valley fever, Nipah, and hentaviral diseases. Other priority illnesses include coronavirus like MERS and SARS, and the mosquito-borne disease, Zika. Notice the list is similar to what was published in that Time magazine. Viruses and bacteria can mutate and become more infectious or deadly, or both. And there's a constant risk that new illnesses could find ways to jump from their hosts to humans. So they generally start with animal kingdom, and then they can jump to humans. So their conclusion is, it's likely that whatever pathogen causes the next pandemic, it'll be something we don't know how to react to. And, you know, that's proven true with the COVID-19. They were putting people in the wrong kind of treatment because they thought that would help. And another thing that seems to have come out is that it's not a virus, it's a bacteria. Well, you have to fight bacteria different from a virus. And so, you know, that's the most deadly part of these things that Satan's going to stir up, and they're going to keep getting worse until finally the whole earth is reduced to a mess, and the cities are even broken down, and so on. And we've seen when new diseases like Zika first emerged, we're not able to stop these illnesses from rapidly spreading with devastating results. But I don't want to stop on that note. God has a plan. You know, God sees the future. He knew Satan would apostatize. And some people might think, well, why did he even make him? But that would remove his choice. You know, and God's not in the business of removing people's choices. So, he knew, he laid plans for human beings to be spared what Satan would do. in two ways, physically and spiritually, to where they would be spared. And this is it in Exodus 15:26. And said, this is God, he said this, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee. Now that bothers some people when God says, I won't put the disease on them. What's he saying? Well, it's the same thing as your car. When you find out from the manufacturer what you should put in the gas tank, what you should put in the oil, what you should put in the transmission, you can put anything you want. I mean, that's your choice. You can put sugar in your gas tank if you want, but if you do that, you'll freeze up your engine. So what do? You listen to what the manufacturer said, you put in what he tells you to put in, and your car runs well. Well, God made us to run even more beautifully than any automobile or anything else on earth. The human body is the most amazing thing on earth. And so when you break the rules of how it's supposed to run, you're going to pay a price. And he says, I put it on you not because I said, okay, I'm going to give them disease. But he says, if you're not willing to do what I asked you to do, you're going to get sick. You're going to have these things happen to you. I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. So, he works at it two ways. First of all, he said, if you don't want to get sick, then obey the health laws and the spiritual laws. The spiritual laws have a big aspect in keeping people well. But there's physical laws also, and he meant all of them. If you keep all of those things, then you will stay well. However, if you do get sick, remember, I am able to heal you. But it calls for recognition of what we did that wasn't right, asking his forgiveness, and putting our trust that he will heal us. And I know some people personally that have been healed from COVID-19. So it even applies to the subject we're looking at. There's another one that's very similar in Deuteronomy 7, verse 15. And the Lord will take away from thee all sickness. Imagine that. God's plan for Israel was that not one sick person would be in their whole nation. Wow. Said, I will take away from thee all sickness, and will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt which thou knowest upon thee. Well, they experienced that for a while. During the 40 years in the wilderness, when in a way they were forced to follow the health laws, nobody was sick at the end of 40 years. But when they went into Canaan and they could eat and do whatever they wanted to do, then they got sick like everybody else. But that wasn't God's plan. He wanted them to be well, not to catch these things. And I believe that God will study some more, but God wants to do the same for his people today. He wants to protect us from disease, but he can't do it if we're going to break the rules. Not because he wouldn't want to, but it just doesn't work that way. You break the rules, then you pay the price. So may God help us as we learn more and more about how to live healthfully, that we have less and less fear of all these things that are going to be taking place on the earth.